Woodstock police received information that 8 people aged 65 to 96 had been murdered at area nursing homes over a 7-year span. They're dealing with a serial killer.
Well, when I first started caring for her, she had quite the spirit. She was a very stubborn woman. And one evening I just got that red surging feeling that she was going to be the one. So I gave her insulin overdose. Afterwards I would hear nickel laughter in my chest. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Absolutely not.
I've only ever had parking tickets. I've never been arrested for anything.
From what I can see here, there's 4 pages of a handwritten document. Is that your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Okay, what brought you to that?
That's where things get a little crazy. I decided I didn't want to nurse anymore. I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore.
Right.
I honestly felt like God wanted to use me.
Did you have any feelings in your mind as far as knowing the difference between right and wrong?
Yes, I knew the difference between right and wrong. But I thought this was something that God or whoever wanted me to do.
Wetlaufer believes she's a chosen one, that God has chosen her to do important work, that God has identified who should die next. I think what that really is just good old-fashioned narcissism. It's making herself more important than she is as a person.
We never think of healthcare professionals to be the type of individuals that would consciously kill the people they're in charge of taking care of. So she's got that as a kind of interesting cover working for her.
So this is an excerpt from notes that Nurse Wetlaufer wrote. And she says, James was known for inappropriately touching the staff. That evening, I got the urge to overdose James. I was angry that he was so inappropriate. It comes across as very sterile clinical. It's as if James is a problem, James needs to die.
The first one that died as a result of what I did. He could be a bit of a handful. He would grab the nurses' breasts and buttocks, and he would say horribly inappropriate things about his wife, that now he was there, he was going to all would stop. But he did touch me inappropriately once.
And where was that?
On my breast.
Run me through.
About 9:30, I gave him a dose of 50 milligrams of insulin. Non-diabetic. So throughout the night he was yelling out, I love you and I'm sorry. Not to me, but just you could hear him calling out in his room, and that's what he was calling out. Mm-hmm. And then at 3:30 the doctor came in and said that his cause of death was from an embolism due to his post-hip.
It might be revenge killing because Wetlaufer talks about how James was inappropriate with the nursing staff.
But she's ignoring the fact of his condition. If he made a pass at her, that may have been the last straw. But the step into psychopathy is deciding to kill him for that behavior.
The family commended you for the work that you had done. And
yes, and I've been there for him, yes.
How does that make you feel?
Awful.
You indicated that he wasn't a very nice man.
No, he wasn't. I wonder if that's a portion of how I chose him. Mm-hmm. And afterwards I did feel a release and a release. Mm-hmm. Like a release of pressure.
My guess is what she's feeling relief about is an internal sense of loathing. It's a sense of self-hate. It's a sense of rejection socially. To kill Silcox allows her to release that sense of conflict.
Rage usually starts early. She's probably slowly but surely since childhood been an angry person. And she finally found a place where she could safely enlist her predatory skills.
Felt pretty bad. And I didn't want to see the family again.
How did you deal with it?
I'd go using the computer and just try to forget about it. When my ex and I broke up in 2007, I was so angry. And it was like a voice said inside me, I'll use you. Don't worry about it. I just had a sense after my marriage broke up that God was going to use me for something.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like you were doing the right thing for these people?
I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do, but it wasn't what was right for them.
This is about her second victim. And it says, I was told by one of the nurses that Maurice had a bad habit of grabbing the staff's breasts and asses. One afternoon, I was working and I felt angry. There's anger that is triggered by something related to sex. It's not specific revenge on this patient, but he now represents something that she's going to eliminate. And so that triggers her psychopathic behavior.
He was another one who liked to grab breasts and asses. One afternoon I was working with him and he did grab me. And again, I got that feeling inside that this is his time to go. So I gave him an overdose of insulin after supper. And I believe he died the next day.
And how did it make you feel when Maurice passed away?
Loved it. I kept having a lot of guilt. A lot of guilt.
When Wetlaufer says, I felt a lot of guilt, it's not over the murder. She feels guilt because there's a conflict between the part of her that went into nursing to help people and the part of her that just took someone's life because she was angry at them.
It's also interesting that she uses the term ass. Ass is a vulgar word. There's a clue there. She doesn't really seem like she's socially adept or skilled with other people. People reveal themselves through the language they use.
There was a period of 3 years when I decided to stop killing.
What was going on in your life at that point?
I always was putting this pressure on myself to be a really good nurse and to do everything perfectly. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, when I could give a hold of a hydromorph or two and take it, then that pressure was gone.
Did you ever use that work?
Yes, probably once or twice a week.
Hydromorphone is an opiate. The choice to use an opiate and get high, I think, was a different direction of trying to get that same stimulation or thrill-seeking that she got from killing those 2 patients.
People think about opiates and morphine. If you think about something like heroin, there's a drug that can bind to receptors in your brain and give you a wonderful hit of opiates very, very quickly. Morphine binds to receptors in a slightly different way, not so gratifying, but prevents people from having withdrawal. And it still has the properties of giving people a sense of feeling high. It's in the right dose, it can be really hard to detect when people are on it. That's why it's a favorite drug of abuse, certainly even in hospital settings where people have access to it. People can remain reasonably alert while enjoying kind of a comfortable sense of being numb or high with it, while not looking drowsy or sleepy. So if you can figure out how to get it, most people can't tell you're on it.
What often happens on narcotics, your inhibitions are reduced to the place where some of those bad thoughts can come back. The more she does that, the more likely it is that the rage would reemerge.
She says Gladys had severe dementia and no longer talked. She was very stubborn and horribly difficult to give pills to. So her victim is a woman, in this case. We learned something new. Women are eligible to be killed.
Well, when I first started caring for her, she was walking and talking, and she had quite the spirit. She once punched a man because she overheard the nurses telling one of the gentlemen, "No, you can't push your wife around." And she turned around and she said, "You can't treat a woman like that." Boom!
And hit the man.
And hit the man. Eventually, she had dementia, didn't take her pills well, didn't eat well, very stubborn woman. And as always, one evening I just got that red surging feeling that she was going to be the one. And gave her insulin overdose.
After laying off killing for about 3 years, the bar seems lower for whom she's willing to kill. She's choosing the weakest and the most vulnerable to act this rage out on. These people can't fight back. They can't hurt her. Some of them can't even talk.
She celebrates this woman decking another guy. You can hear she laughs. She's invigorated by it. But then, this woman that she can identify with now becomes a pain in the ass because she's demented and giving her a problem. This is where I think psychopathy becomes even more prominent. It doesn't matter now whether you're a man or a woman making sexual or non-sexual comments. The common denominator is you're irritating. And if you irritate her, she decides you gotta go.
Wetlaufer started to write poetry. Here is one of those poems. She watches some life drain from the notch in his neck vein. As it soothingly pools, it smothers her pain. Sweet stiletto, so sharp, craves another cut. I really see that as murdering people helps her feel better. And it makes me really wonder if there is some sadistic piece of her that enjoys watching them struggle.
Helen just seemed to be waiting to die. Mm-hmm. Again, I had that feeling that, this is one. Mm-hmm. That night, she was very lucid, and we talked about how much she liked blueberry pie and ice cream. So on my break, I went to Walmart. I got a small blueberry pie and some ice cream and brought it to her, and she ate 3 or 4 bites.
On the surface, it makes her look like the super nurse on the unit. But what we know is that she also knew that she was essentially giving her her last meal. And she had every intention of killing her later that night.
She didn't have to give her blueberry pie and ice cream, so she's playing with her. She delights in killing someone, and that's a very perverse delight.
I had that feeling that it was her time to go.
What do you mean by that? Do you think she was towards the end of her life at that point?
No, that she was the person to go next.
She wasn't combative?
No.
Where was that feeling?
In my chest area. After I did it, I got that laughter.
To actually state that she laughed out loud after killing her, I mean, what kind of person does that? The person didn't even annoy her.
She just gets this feeling very primitively in her chest. And if she has that feeling and she's around a particular individual, it seems like that's how it gets pegged.
She enjoys the high. She enjoys the power. This isn't about the patients at all at this point. Wetlaufer has discovered something about herself she didn't know. She enjoys killing.
This is an excerpt from the confession letter of Wetlaufer about Mary Zerowinski. Mary bugged me because she was outspoken and resistive to care. I was feeling very angry in general. She died the next afternoon. She's returned to some of the old playbook signals. If patient is annoying, patient's gotta go.
She's hurt the nursing right. I think she's just very outspoken and feisty. One night she said, I'm going to die tonight. Why don't you get me into the deathbed so I can die? So I said, okay, well, let's put her inside the spare room if that's what you want. So we did, and then I thought, well, she must be the next one. So I gave her another insulin. She became palliative and she died.
And Mary ever trying to harm you or
No.
upset you in any way?
No. She was fun.
She was fun to work with, but she's also saying that Mary essentially gave her permission to kill her. The impulse control is very poor at this point.
Just because someone says, I want to die, doesn't mean you have permission to kill them or that you should kill them. But it enables her psychopathy in the sense that she doesn't even have to be annoyed. It's about revenge writ large, revenge about whatever happened to me in the past. I'm going to bite the world back. She's plotting everybody's murder while being sweet to them and taking care of them, and then ushers them right off to their death.
She's died the next afternoon. When you go here. Sure. There you go.
Which one has the vodka in it?
This is what she has to say about Maureen and killing her. Maureen had a lot of behaviors. She would hit other residents or pull their hair. Then I got the idea that if I could cause her some brain damage, she wouldn't be such a handful. Wetlaufer is changing her motivations for killing. Now, she's dealing with patients where she doesn't even feel the urge necessarily to kill them. She just wants to control the situation.
Eventually, it was decided that she needed a one-on-one staff. It was the role of the charge nurse. And that was nuts. She just got harder and harder to look after, and one night when I had to look after her, I started getting the feeling about surge again. If I could somehow give her enough of a dose to give her a coma, or something to change her brain waves, maybe make her less mobile, less hard to handle. So, yeah, I overdosed her.
Do you remember how much insulin you gave to Mrs. Cooper?
It was a lot. I'm going to say 80 long-acting and 50 short-acting, something like that. It was a lot of insulin.
Why so much, Trevor?
Wasn't sure if she would die or not.
It's terrifying to think about a nurse doing that. Wetlaufer is making the decision to handle these patients as if they're objects. You really see an arrogance coming over Wetlaufer. Now it's just about making sure she doesn't experience stress.
She's not even saying it's a sign from God I should kill her. She's going, I just want to mutilate her brain so she stops being such a pain in the ass, which is hostile and aggressive. We are seeing this progression from killing men who are sexually aggressive and abusive. And then it progresses to general irritability. She then picks on a victim who is defenseless. This is psychopathy.
And I am sorry. I'm sorry for what the families went through at the time, and I'm extremely sorry for what they're going to go through. It's awful.
If you could say something to them, what would you say?
I'm sorry isn't enough. I honestly believed at the time that God wanted me to do it, but I know now that's not true.
You could have been in this situation and taken this to your grave.
That's what I was told to do by a lawyer.
It's important to note that she turned herself in because she had an opportunity to work with children. She says it's because she wanted to stop killing, but it's not as easy to kill children without people asking questions.
Even the pretense that this is driven by God is off the table. She's mastered the art of being a nice person. So she covers very skillfully how malignant she is. She really is an angel of death. And she's highly psychopathic.
How much does Mama love you?
This much.
Oh, I love you more than that. Sophia was singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star because that's her favorite song. There's Sophia. Mommy. Can you see Mommy? I thought they were asleep. They weren't moving and her hand was cold. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? There was this purple mark on Sophia's face. And then I went and looked at Serena. But up on her leg here was a purpley color. And God's taking care of us now. You are the devil.
Our communications center received a call that there was two dead children inside of an apartment.
Neighbors identified the little girls as Serena and Sophia, and their mother was the one who called police to their fourth-floor apartment.
Now you understand that you've been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Yes, I
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
And the charges are for murder in regards to both of your children. Okay? Only you know what was going on when this
They were
happened.
my babies.
They're your babies, I know.
Serena was playing in the living room, coloring, doing sign language. Sophia was having a bath. Everything was fine. They go to bed between 7 and 8 o'clock at night, every night. The next thing I know is I got people at my house.
Mm-hmm.
A guy with a blue outfit with orange on it in my bedroom.
Do you remember making the call? There was a phone call you made this morning.
That's the thing. There's a blockage. I don't remember.
In a nutshell, I don't believe her. Amnesia doesn't work that way. It's not persuasive. But that seems to be her narrative she's presenting, is everything was normal.
The next thing I know is there's people at my door.
She almost sounds childlike herself, helpless, frail. I think it was this vacillation between trying to decide if she wanted to come across as mentally unstable, that she had no memory of what she did, to really dissociating and not wanting to face the emotional reality that she's killed her children.
We were videotaping. We sing, you know, joy, joy to the world, you know, all the songs that they love.
Where do you think your children are now?
I assume my husband has them.
You understand that both the children, Sophia and Serena, are both deceased?
I would scream. Most people would have a much more extreme reaction to first hearing that, if they really believed 2 seconds ago that they were just with their dad. Even though she's crying, she's relatively calm, so that is very striking about her reaction. I'm a little skeptical about the authenticity of it.
With people who have psychopathy, we'll often see a meager effort at the display of emotion, sometimes a feigned effort if they can't muster enough of a feeling.
And I'm just going to back up. So what happened last night?
Sophia was having a bath. It's like this usual routine that we always take.
So what happens when she's finished her bath?
She gets out of the tub and I dried her off. She was really, really tired.
Mm-hmm.
She gets bags underneath her eyes just like me. So I just got her in her pajamas and put her into bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went out to the living room, was cleaning up everything. I had took a bunch of pills. I was getting really, really tired. I curled up with Sophia and she was cold.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they turn and cuddle in with me. They weren't cuddling in with me. And Sophia had weird colored lips.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at Serena and she was looking weird too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I thought there was something wrong.
What she's describing is post-mortem effects for the children, and yet she's talking about them like they're alive and they're just injured. So there's a complete disconnect there. What we know is that after she drowned them, she dressed them in pretty little princess dresses, and she did up their hair, and she made them look beautiful, and then she put them to bed, dead. It's creepy on a lot of levels. Her ability to objectify her children and maintain her own narrative that was not based in reality allowed her to drown each of them.
At any point, did you push her under the water?
No. These are my babies. I've been trying to teach them not to be scared of the water.
How did they die?
I'm not allowed to speak without an attorney present.
Mm-hmm. Did you kill both of them?
I cannot speak without an attorney present.
You knew when you went to bed on Monday night that they weren't breathing, then they weren't moving.
They were sleeping.
Elaine, they weren't sleeping. You were hoping you weren't going to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
If those pills would have worked and you went to sleep and you didn't wake up, what were your girls going to do?
I don't know.
Why don't you know that?
Because I don't know and I can't answer any more questions without an attorney.
Make no mistake, she never misses a beat to stay in control of the interview. She never misses a beat to exert her legal right. She's quite clear and definite about that. When you see that switch so automatically, that is more consistent with psychopathic behavior than a broken, psychologically frail individual who has just lost her 2 daughters.
What were they going to do?
I don't.
With you lying in bed?
I don't know.
Her lack of an answer is telling. I think that her plan was to kill herself with the pills, and it didn't work. I don't think that she had really thought beyond what would happen if she didn't die. Sometimes when psychopaths entertain suicide, it's because they want to have the final say.
And you said you wanted to end your life. You wanted to end it all.
I wouldn't kill my babies. My babies are my life.
What are you watching, you?
Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty.
How much does Mama love you?
This much.
Oh, I love you more than that. How much does Mama love you?
Here's Sophia.
A minute.
Mommy. Can you see Mommy?
She made a video on the day of their death. It's probably not an accident. The Sleeping Beauty is playing for the kids. This doesn't bode well. Sleeping Beauty is the story of a wonderful young woman who can't wake up until she's kissed by the handsome prince to come out of her state of sleep that's induced by the witch. Consistent with that, once they're dead, she dresses them up and lays them out so they are little sleeping beauties.
She made a strategic, calculated decision to videotape her children in their last moments. She's documenting what a fantastic mother she was, and yet she drowns them. Elaine Campione is somebody who is fused with her children. Her ego, her internal sense of self, is anchored by the existence and the narrative of, I am a perfect mother. She's speaking with positive affect. She has love in her voice in what she's saying to them, that Mommy loves you. She's joking with them. There's a total disconnect.
And after the girls had their bath, you put them into their bed?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Somewhere in there, your children died because they did not wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you if you suffocated them.
I did not suffocate them.
And
I cannot answer any more questions until I have a legal advocate.
Now, when we do the autopsy, are we going to find water in the lungs?
I'm not allowed to answer anything without an answer.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure is that they did die peacefully. Peacefully.
Serena's 3 today. Yay!
What do you think, Sophia? You sing happy birthday? No?
I'm 3.
You're 3 today. Yay! Shall we go to the living room and see if you got any birthday presents from the birthday fairies?
Yes!
I know you love them. I can tell that. I can see that in your eyes. I'm trying to understand what happened last night, and only you can tell me that.
I was videotaping my 2-year-old signing I love you, and my baby was in the tub, and that's all I remember. recording this because Leo and I are very happy. Everything is gone. I hate you. I truly, truly hate you. You didn't care about our babies. You didn't care about me. You care about yourself. All you did was hurt us. You're an evil, horrible man. And I'm just going to God, because God is the only one who cares and can protect me. Because you are the devil, Leo. You are the psychotic devil. At least the girls and I will be together in heaven, protected and safe from you.
Ultimately, this was a case of revenge. This is Elaine Campione's narrative. Elaine is a perfect mother. Elaine is the only one who can take care of her children.
How much does Mama love you?
This much.
Many parents hate each other, you know, and want to get back at one another, even use their kids as pawns to get back, but they don't kill them.
It sounds like it had been a difficult relationship, but she's used her kids as a weapon in that way to punish her husband. The psychopathic part is viewing the children as the implements.
I tried to overdose. I'm not meant to be well. I don't care what you say. I want freedom from you. Why could you not let us go? My children have finally had freedom from you. This girl loved me. She loved me so much. But I betrayed her.
Her tone is less irate in this video. It's as if she's woken up unexpectedly, perhaps because she thought she was going to die, and she is trying to come to terms with this.
When we think of parents who are psychologically fused with their children, those children are their anchors for their personality. I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of the unraveling because her anchor is gone. She's killed them. She's more broken. This is a lot of fractured, damaged personality structure. She's two very different people in many ways. You have this woman who is presenting herself as very frail and beaten down, but then on the other hand, she's clearly very much in control of her decisions.
Legal papers were also found advising Campione to appear in court for a child custody hearing October 5th, the day after the girls' bodies were discovered. Leo Campione was trying to get custody of the girls at the time they were killed.
The custody aspect is a key element in this. So it's possible that she saw this as her only option to ensure definitively that he would not get to be with the girls.
And her response to it is, I'll take them and you won't ever get them. That's her power.
This was a note that Elaine took the time to write. It was directed at her husband, and it says, "All I wanted was a way out. The system failed. I was a great mother, and you wouldn't leave me alone. I had to protect our girls. They will sail away from this and all of you. I hate you." Her narrative is that she's actually doing something that's incredibly altruistic. And she's making it clear to her husband that he caused this. It's not her who drowned them. He pushed her to do this.
Doctors' notes revealed that Campione was having trouble seeing herself and children as separate entities. These These pictures were used by the defense as evidence. Campione apparently told her mother to take it, saying she loved her kids and was fearful there would be no memory of her. Campione's lawyer argues her client is mentally ill, that she suffered from delusions and paranoia and didn't feel she or her children were safe.
Once she had a goal in mind, which was to kill them, to take them away from her husband, she's very systematic about how she goes about that goal. That's highly inconsistent with how people who experience delusions and paranoia behave. She is as psychopathic as she feels. She is self-righteous. She feels vindicated. She did something that no parent had the courage to do.
The jury didn't buy the defense argument that it was mental illness that made her do it and not a bitter custody dispute with her ex-husband.
There's nothing wrong with me mentally, there isn't.
Elaine Campione sobbed uncontrollably as the jury announced a guilty verdict. Her tears then turned to anger as she swore before being handcuffed and hauled out of the courtroom.
There's where you see the self-righteousness. There's where you see the attitude of, why am I being hauled out in handcuffs? I did what was the right thing to do. And it was the most protective thing she could do for her daughters, because she is a perfect mother, and mommy loves you.
Hey, Serena, who loves ya?
Mommy.
Who loves you the most? That much? Oh, I think I love you more than that.
In the spring of 1928, Southern California was widely imagined as a land of endless sunshine, expanding neighborhoods, fertile orange groves, and promises of a brighter future. Families moved west believing they were leaving behind hardship and uncertainty in search of opportunity. Children walked to school, rode bicycles through quiet streets, and spent long afternoons playing beneath clear blue skies. It was a place where parents believed the greatest dangers came from illness, accidents, or the unpredictable forces of nature, not from a man waiting patiently behind the wheel of a car on a dusty roadside. Yet hidden among the farms and orchards of Riverside County stood a modest chicken ranch that would eventually become synonymous with one of the darkest child murder investigations in American history. To anyone passing by, it appeared unremarkable. Chickens wandered through fenced enclosures. A farmhouse stood quietly beneath the California sun, and the surrounding fields seemed no different from hundreds of other rural properties scattered across the region. There were no obvious signs that anything was wrong. No cries carried across the orchards. No visible evidence hinted that children who entered the property would never return. Years later, investigators, historians, and journalists would look back at that isolated ranch with the same haunting question: how could such unimaginable crimes remain hidden in plain sight for so long? The answer was not simple. It was a story of isolation, fear, manipulation, missed opportunities, and a justice system that failed vulnerable families when they needed it most. At the center of that story stood a young man named Gordon Stewart Northcott, outwardly the owner of a small chicken ranch, inwardly a predator who used deception, violence, and terror against children. But this was never only the story of one offender. It was also the story of boys whose lives ended long before they had the chance to become adults, of a frightened teenager forced into silence through abuse and threats, and of investigators who would eventually uncover evidence so disturbing that the name of an entire town would become permanently associated with horror. Long before authorities discovered the truth, rumors had already begun to spread across Southern California. Children disappeared. Families searched desperately. Posters were printed. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Every missing child left another family trapped between hope and despair, waiting for news that often never came. In an era without modern forensic science, computerized records, or rapid communication between jurisdictions, disappearances could remain disconnected from one another. One missing boy might be considered an isolated tragedy. Two might still be dismissed as coincidence. But when more children vanished, fear slowly settled over communities that had once believed themselves to be safe. Parents began watching their children more carefully. Newspapers reported new disappearances with increasing concern. Still, no one could yet see the pattern that would later become painfully obvious. The crime stretched across communities surrounding Los Angeles, Riverside, and Pomona. The victims were boys, many between 9 and 15 years old. They vanished while walking alone, traveling through familiar neighborhoods, or carrying out ordinary daily routines. Their disappearances were separated by distance and time, making it difficult for authorities to connect them. What nobody realized was that many of those ordinary journeys may have ended on a lonely dirt road, leading toward an isolated ranch in Wineville. The ranch itself was perfectly suited for secrecy. Purchased in 1926 by Northcutt's father after Gordon persuaded him to invest in the property. It stood well away from crowded neighborhoods. Orange groves surrounded the land, limiting visibility from neighboring farms. A dirt road provided the primary access, and relatively few people had reason to visit. The buildings included a farmhouse, storage areas, chicken coops, and an incubator room used for raising chicks. Everything about the property appeared consistent with agricultural life. To strangers, it was simply another working ranch. To investigators arriving years later, every one of those ordinary structures would take on a terrifying significance. Yet in those early years, nothing about the ranch immediately invited suspicion. Its isolation, rather than attracting attention, discouraged it. It was precisely the kind of place where terrible secrets could remain buried. While the ranch concealed its horrors, another tragedy unfolded in Los Angeles. On March 10, 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins left home after his mother, Christine Collins, gave him money to go to the movies. It was an ordinary Saturday. There was no indication that anything unusual would happen. Like countless children before him, Walter expected to return home later that day. Instead, he disappeared without a trace. His disappearance quickly became one of the most publicized missing child cases in California. Christine Collins searched relentlessly for her son, refusing to abandon hope despite the passing weeks. Eventually, authorities announced what appeared to be remarkable news. They claimed Walter had been found alive in Illinois and arranged for him to be reunited with his mother. But the celebration lasted only moments. Christine immediately insisted that the child standing before her was not her son. Rather than accepting her concerns and reopening the investigation, police rejected her claims. They maintained that the boy was Walter and questioned Christine's judgment instead. In one of the most controversial decisions in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department, she was committed to a psychiatric hospital under the department's Code 12 procedure after refusing to accept the child presented to her. Only later did the boy admit that he had impersonated Walter Collins in hopes of traveling to Hollywood. By then, public confidence in the investigation had been deeply shaken. Walter Collins was never conclusively found, and although his disappearance would later become associated with Gordon Northcutt's crimes, his fate has never been definitively established. That uncertainty remains one of the most painful aspects of the entire case. Even today, historians distinguish carefully between documented convictions and unresolved questions, acknowledging both the evidence that exists and the evidence that was never found. While Walter's disappearance drew enormous public attention, another child was enduring unimaginable suffering far from the headlines. Sanford Clark, only about 14 years old, had traveled from Canada to California after being told he would work on his Uncle Gordon Northcutt's ranch. His family believed the move represented an opportunity for a better future. Instead, Sanford entered an environment dominated by violence, intimidation, and absolute control. According to his later testimony, he was beaten, sexually abused, threatened with death, and forced to perform exhausting labor. He was isolated from his family and repeatedly warned that any attempt to escape or reveal what he had witnessed would result in devastating consequences. The threats extended beyond his own life. Northcott allegedly warned that Sanford's family would also be harmed if he spoke. Those threats created a prison more powerful than locked doors. Fear became constant. Silence became survival. Unknown to the outside world, Sanford would eventually become the single most important witness in exposing the crimes committed at the ranch. His testimony would form the foundation of the prosecution's case, transforming him from a frightened victim into the individual whose courage helped reveal one of America's darkest criminal investigations. But at the beginning of this story, none of that had yet happened. The ranch remained quiet. The disappearances remained unsolved. Families continued searching for children who never returned. Police struggled to connect scattered cases across multiple communities. And somewhere behind the ordinary appearance of a rural chicken farm, terrible secrets waited beneath the California soil, hidden behind silence, fear, and the illusion of normal life. Before investigators uncovered human bones, blood-stained evidence, and burial pits, before courtroom testimony revealed the unimaginable abuse that had taken place, and before the town of Wineville would ultimately abandon its own name in an attempt to escape the shadow of these crimes, there was only uncertainty. There were grieving parents, unanswered questions, and an isolated ranch that looked no different from any other. The truth, when it finally emerged, would forever change how America remembered that quiet corner of Riverside County. In the years before the Wineville chicken coop murders became front-page news across California, nothing about the small ranch in Riverside County appeared extraordinary. Travelers passing along the dusty roads would have seen the familiar landscape that defined much of Southern California during the 1920s. Orange groves stretched toward the horizon, separated by narrow dirt paths and scattered farmhouses. Poultry ranches were common throughout the region, supplying eggs and chickens to rapidly growing cities like Los Angeles. The air carried the scent of dry earth and citrus blossoms, while the sounds of livestock blended into the quiet rhythm of rural life. It was a place where neighbors often lived far apart, where privacy was accepted as part of country living, and where an isolated property rarely attracted curiosity. Hidden within that ordinary landscape was a ranch that would later become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. But before it became known as the site of horrific murders, it was simply Gordon Stewart Northcott's Chicken Ranch. Understanding how that ranch became the center of such terrible crimes begins with understanding the people who lived there. Gordon Stewart Northcott was born on November 9, 1906, in Saskatchewan, Canada. Compared to many notorious criminals whose lives have been extensively documented, relatively little is included in the available historical record provided here about his childhood or early development. What is known is that he moved to California in 1924 while still a teenager. Southern California was experiencing remarkable growth during that period. Agriculture flourished, land was being developed, and families from across North America were arriving in search of opportunity. For a young man like Northcott, California offered the possibility of building an independent life. In 1926, after Gordon persuaded his father to invest in the idea, the family purchased a chicken ranch in Wineville, a small farming community in Riverside County. The decision appeared entirely reasonable. Poultry farming was a legitimate business, and the property itself was suited for agricultural work. To anyone meeting Gordon for the first time, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a young ranch owner beginning his future. Nothing in his public image suggested that behind the quiet routines of farm life existed a pattern of calculated violence against children. That contrast between appearance and reality would become one of the defining characteristics of the entire case. The ranch itself played a critical role in everything that followed. According to the available evidence, it contained several structures used for farming, including chicken coops, storage buildings, and an incubator room where chicks could be raised. The property stood apart from heavily populated neighborhoods. Orange groves surrounded much of the land, limiting visibility from nearby roads and neighboring farms. A single dirt road led toward the buildings, and relatively few people had reason to visit unexpectedly. During the day, ordinary farming activities created the impression of a completely normal agricultural operation. Equipment was moved around the property. Animals required daily care. Fires used to dispose of farm waste would not necessarily attract suspicion. Digging holes was a routine part of maintaining agricultural land. In hindsight, investigators would recognize that the very features making the ranch practical for farming also made it frighteningly effective at concealing criminal activity. Distance, isolation, and privacy allowed terrible acts to remain hidden far longer than might have been possible in a crowded city. Yet the most significant person living on the ranch was not Gordon Northcott himself. It was a frightened teenage boy named Sanford Clark. Sanford was Gordon's nephew. Around the age of 13 or 14, he was brought from Canada to California with the understanding that he would work on the family ranch. To Sanford's family, the arrangement likely seemed beneficial. It was common during that era for young relatives to assist with family businesses, especially in farming communities where labor was valuable and opportunities could shape a young person's future. There was no reason for them to imagine that the ranch represented danger instead of opportunity. Almost immediately after arriving, however, Sanford discovered that the promises made to him were false. According to his later testimony, he was subjected to repeated physical abuse. Northcott beat him and established control through intimidation. More horrifying still, Sanford later stated that he endured repeated sexual abuse. Violence became a routine part of daily life. Every day carried uncertainty because punishment could come without warning. Alongside the physical abuse came psychological domination. Northcott allegedly threatened Sanford with firearms and repeatedly warned that any attempt to escape would result not only in Sanford's death, but also in harm to members of his family back in Canada. Such threats created a prison without walls. Although the ranch stood in open countryside, Sanford's fear made escape seem impossible. He had been separated from his parents, isolated from anyone who might help him, and convinced that silence was the only way to keep the people he loved alive. Modern readers often ask why victims of prolonged abuse remain under the control of violent offenders. Sanford's experience offers a painful answer. A child subjected to continuous violence, isolated from support, and convinced that resistance will endanger others may come to believe there is no safe choice. His later testimony reflects not weakness, but survival under extraordinary coercion. Daily life on the ranch revolved around exhausting labor. Sanford later described working long hours while remaining under constant supervision. Physical exhaustion reinforced psychological control. At the same time, communication with his family was effectively prevented. Cut off from trusted adults, he became increasingly dependent upon the very person abusing him. This pattern of isolation, intimidation, and manipulation would later help investigators understand why Sanford had remained silent despite witnessing horrifying events. Eventually, his ordeal grew even more severe. According to his testimony, Northcott forced him to assist in concealing evidence after murders had been committed. Sanford stated that he was ordered to dig graves, move bodies, burn victims' clothing, clean blood from the incubator room, and bury remains. Later, he also described being forced to break apart bones after bodies had been burned. Every task was carried out under threats of death. The psychological burden of these experiences cannot be overstated. Sanford was not simply witnessing violence. He was being compelled to participate in hiding crimes while believing refusal would cost him his life. His testimony would later become one of the most significant pieces of evidence presented during the investigation and trial, because much of the physical evidence had already been destroyed through burning and the use of quicklime. The ranch itself gradually transformed into what investigators would later describe as the central location of the murders. According to Sanford, children brought there were confined inside the incubator room or chicken coops. Doors remained locked, windows were covered, and victims received little food. The same buildings intended to shelter livestock became places of imprisonment. The incubator room, originally designed to support new life by hatching chicks, became associated instead with unimaginable suffering. The symbolism was difficult to ignore. A building created for nurturing fragile life became one of the principal locations connected to the destruction of innocent lives. What makes the story especially disturbing is that everything occurring on the ranch unfolded behind a facade of normality. From a distance, neighbors saw only another agricultural property. Farm work naturally involved axes, digging, fires, and the movement of heavy materials. None of those activities, viewed independently, appeared unusual. The ranch's remote setting meant that screams, if any were heard at all, were unlikely to reach anyone able to intervene. The surrounding orange groves created natural barriers that shielded much of the property from view. Geography itself became an unwitting accomplice, allowing crimes to remain concealed while families across Southern California searched desperately for missing children. Throughout this period, Gordon Northcott maintained the outward identity of a hardworking ranch owner. There was little visible evidence connecting him to the disappearances occurring across Los Angeles, Pomona, and Riverside. Parents searched neighborhoods, questioned friends, and hoped for the safe return of their sons. Few could have imagined that some of those missing boys had been taken to an isolated chicken ranch, where another child was already living in fear. Sanford Clark occupied a unique and heartbreaking position within the story. He was both a victim and the only surviving eyewitness capable of describing what had happened. Inside the ranch, his eventual testimony would not only expose Gordon Northcott's crimes, but also provide investigators with a framework for understanding evidence that otherwise might have remained impossible to interpret. Without Sanford's courage after months of terror and coercion, the truth hidden within the Wineville Ranch might never have been fully uncovered. As 1926 gave way to 1927 and then to 1928, the quiet ranch continued to stand among the orange groves, outwardly unchanged. Yet behind its ordinary appearance, the stage had already been set for a series of disappearances that would horrify the nation. Young boys would continue to vanish under seemingly ordinary circumstances, unaware that an invitation to see baby chicks, accept work, or simply take a ride could become the last decision of their lives. The next chapter of the story belongs to those children and to the calculated methods through which Gordon Northcott drew them into a place from which many would never return. As 1927 unfolded, Southern California continued to grow with remarkable speed. New neighborhoods expanded beyond the boundaries of Los Angeles. Roads connected once isolated farming communities, and families settled into what they believed was a safer and more prosperous future. Children filled schoolyards during the week and spent weekends exploring neighborhoods, visiting friends, attending club meetings, or running simple errands for their parents. Their routines reflected a time when young boys often enjoyed a degree of independence that would seem unusual today. They walked to local shops alone, rode bicycles through familiar streets, and accepted that the world around them was generally safe. It was precisely this sense of ordinary security that Gordon Stewart Northcott exploited. Unlike crimes driven by sudden opportunity, the evidence presented in the Wineville investigation suggested a recurring pattern. Northcott did not randomly encounter children while acting on impulse. According to the available evidence, he actively searched for boys, traveling through communities including Los Angeles, Pomona, and Riverside. These were areas connected by roads that allowed him to move without attracting unusual attention. Each trip offered opportunities to encounter children who were temporarily alone, separated from parents, or simply carrying out ordinary daily activities. His methods relied less on force than on deception. Rather than frightening his victims immediately, he approached them with offers that appeared harmless. Some boys were reportedly invited to visit the ranch to see newly hatched chicks. Others were offered work, an attractive possibility for children who wanted to earn a little money or help support their families. In some instances, a simple offer of a ride became the first step in the chain of events that ended at the isolated ranch in Wineville. These invitations reflected a painful reality about crimes against children. Predators often exploit trust before they rely upon violence. The children had no reason to suspect that an ordinary conversation with an adult could place them in mortal danger. The ranch itself added credibility to the deception. A working chicken farm naturally suggested that chicks could indeed be seen, and temporary work on farms was not uncommon during that period. Nothing about the invitation would necessarily have sounded extraordinary to a young boy unfamiliar with the dangers waiting beyond the ranch gates. According to the evidence later presented during the investigation, Northcott generally targeted boys between approximately 9 and 15 years old. Although each victim had his own personality, family, and daily routine, they shared certain vulnerabilities. They were children navigating the ordinary freedoms of the era. They trusted adults more readily than modern children are often taught to do. They lived before nationwide missing child alert systems, before sophisticated forensic databases, and before law enforcement agencies routinely shared information across jurisdictions with speed and consistency. When a child disappeared, investigators frequently treated the case as an isolated event. It could take considerable time before anyone recognized similarities between multiple disappearances occurring in different communities. That delay worked in Northcott's favor. Once children arrived at the ranch, the nature of the crimes changed dramatically. According to Sanford Clark's later testimony, victims were confined inside the ranch, often in the incubator room or within the chicken coop structures. Doors were kept locked, and opportunities for escape were effectively eliminated. The boys were given very little food and were subjected to repeated physical abuse. Sanford described an atmosphere dominated by fear, where violence was unpredictable and resistance carried terrible consequences. The ranch, viewed from the outside as a place devoted to raising animals, became a prison hidden within an ordinary agricultural setting. The isolation of the property strengthened Northcott's control. The surrounding orange groves reduced visibility, while the distance from neighboring homes meant that cries for help were unlikely to reach anyone capable of intervening. Even if someone had noticed unusual activity, farm work often involved loud tools, animals, digging, and fires, making it difficult to distinguish ordinary agricultural tasks from criminal acts occurring behind closed doors. The evidence also established that Northcott subjected his victims to repeated sexual abuse. This aspect of the case reveals that the murders were not isolated acts of violence, but part of a broader pattern of prolonged victimization. The boys endured physical suffering and psychological terror before their deaths. Sanford Clark's testimony indicated that victims were often kept alive for periods of time while being abused, deprived of adequate food, and held under constant control. For investigators, these details demonstrated that the crimes involved sustained captivity rather than immediate homicide. Equally disturbing was Sanford's own position within the ranch. Already living under continuous threats, he was forced to witness many of these events. According to his testimony, Northcott deliberately exposed him to the abuse inflicted upon the victims, reinforcing the belief that disobedience would bring similar consequences. Sanford's fear became another tool through which Northcott maintained absolute authority over the ranch. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. A young teenager, isolated from his family, repeatedly abused himself and threatened with death, found himself watching other children experience the same terror while believing he had no power to intervene. His later testimony would reveal not only the physical brutality occurring on the ranch, but also the climate of fear that surrounded every aspect of daily life. One recurring detail from Sanford's account became particularly haunting. He stated that Northcott sometimes invited children into the incubator room by telling them to come and look at newly hatched chicks. Within the context of a working poultry ranch, such an invitation appeared entirely believable. The incubator room was designed to produce life, to shelter fragile newborn animals during their earliest days. Yet according to Sanford's testimony, that ordinary purpose became part of Northcott's deception. Once victims were inside and vulnerable, the violence escalated. Sanford later described that when Northcott decided a victim was no longer of value, he killed the child with an axe. According to the testimony, Northcott often struck from behind, giving the victim little or no opportunity to defend himself. Some children reportedly died immediately, while others required multiple blows. The murders themselves were followed by deliberate attempts to conceal the evidence. Sanford stated that he was forced to help move bodies, dig burial pits, burn clothing belonging to victims, and clean blood from the incubator room. According to his testimony, remains were sometimes buried, while in other instances they were burned. Quicklime was also used in an effort to accelerate decomposition and hinder later identification. These actions reveal a level of planning that extended beyond the killings themselves. Northcott was not merely committing murder. He was attempting to erase every trace that those children had ever been present on the ranch. Fire destroyed clothing and biological evidence. Burial concealed remains beneath the soil. Quicklime complicated later forensic examination. These efforts would significantly challenge investigators once the property was finally searched. Throughout this period, no one outside the ranch fully understood what was happening. Families searched desperately for missing sons. Friends wondered why classmates had disappeared. Police pursued individual investigations, but without the benefit of modern communication systems. Many disappearances remained disconnected from one another. Each missing child represented another family trapped in uncertainty, forced to hope that their son might still be alive somewhere. Few could imagine that several of those disappearances shared a common destination hidden among the orange groves of Wineville. Among the confirmed victims whose stories later emerged were Lewis Winslow and his younger brother, Nelson Winslow. In May 1928, the two boys disappeared after attending a model boat club meeting. Their disappearance devastated their family. Soon afterward, letters arrived claiming that the brothers had voluntarily traveled to Mexico. At the time, those letters created confusion and uncertainty. Families desperately searching for missing children often clung to any possibility that their loved ones might still be alive. Only later would investigators determine that the letters had been fabricated in an apparent effort to mislead authorities and delay suspicion. The murders of Lewis and Nelson would ultimately become two of the three homicide convictions secured against Northcott. Another victim associated with the case was Alvin Godhe, believed to be the unidentified headless Mexican referenced during the investigation. According to the historical record, a headless body discovered in La Puente was later linked to Alvin Godhe, and Northcott was convicted of that murder as well. Although questions surrounding the victim's identification persisted for years, the conviction reflected the evidence presented during the legal proceedings. These confirmed cases represented only a portion of the tragedy. During various stages of the investigation, Northcott made statements suggesting that additional children had been killed. Contemporary reports speculated that the total number of victims might have reached 10 or even 20. However, investigators and later historians have consistently distinguished speculation from evidence. Only 3 murders resulted in convictions, while the disappearance of Walter Collins, despite its close association with the case, has never been conclusively proven to have ended at the Wineville Ranch. That distinction remains essential in preserving the historical accuracy of the investigation. By the summer of 1928, a pattern had emerged that few outside the investigation yet recognized. Children continued to disappear. families continued to search. Northcott continued operating his ranch while presenting himself as an ordinary poultry farmer. Sanford Clark remained trapped inside an environment ruled by violence, forced to carry the weight of unbearable secrets while believing that speaking the truth would cost not only his own life, but also the lives of those he loved. The crimes might have continued even longer had one unexpected visit not shattered the silence surrounding the isolated ranch. A family member arriving from Canada would give Sanford the first genuine opportunity to reveal the horrors hidden behind the ordinary fences of the Wineville Chicken Ranch, setting in motion the investigation that would finally expose one of America's darkest criminal secrets. By the spring of 1928, the disappearances of young boys were no longer isolated tragedies experienced by individual families. Across Southern California, fear was beginning to spread quietly from one neighborhood to another. Parents exchanged worried conversations, newspapers carried reports of missing children, and communities that had once felt secure found themselves asking unsettling questions. Every disappearance left behind an empty bedroom, an unfinished conversation, and a family suspended between hope and despair. Some parents believed their children had run away. Others feared kidnapping. Few could imagine that several of those missing boys had crossed paths with the same man, or that an isolated chicken ranch hidden among the orange groves of Wineville might hold the answers they desperately sought. Among the victims connected to the investigation, 3 boys would ultimately become the foundation of Gordon Stewart Northcott's murder convictions, while another missing child, Walter Collins, would become the face of one of the greatest policing scandals in Los Angeles history. Their stories remain central not because they represent every victim, but because they reveal both the human cost of the crimes and the profound failures that allowed uncertainty to endure for so long. One of the earliest victims associated with the case was Alvin Gathi, a teenage boy of Mexican heritage. For years, even his identity remained uncertain. According to the historical record provided in this case, investigators discovered the headless body of an unidentified boy near La Puente. Without modern forensic technology, identifying the victim proved extraordinarily difficult. There were no DNA databases, no computerized missing person systems, and no reliable scientific methods capable of quickly matching unidentified remains with families searching for missing children. As a result, the young victim initially became known only through a grim description: the headless Mexican. Behind that impersonal label, however, was a child whose life had been violently taken. Over time, investigators concluded that the victim was most likely Alvin Gathi. During the legal proceedings that followed, Gordon Stewart Northcott was convicted of murdering the boy identified in court records under that description. Although questions regarding the victim's precise identification persisted for many years, the conviction reflected the evidence accepted by the court. Alvin's story illustrates one of the lasting tragedies surrounding the Wineville investigation. Even in death, some victims struggled to regain their names. Long after newspapers stopped printing headlines, historians continued attempting to reconstruct the identities of children whose lives had nearly disappeared beneath layers of destroyed evidence and fading memories. If Alvin's case reflected the difficulty of identifying victims, the disappearance of Lewis and Nelson Winslow revealed the emotional devastation experienced by families searching for children who seemed simply to vanish. Lewis Winslow was 12 years old. His younger brother Nelson was 10. Like many boys their age, they participated in ordinary childhood activities. In May 1928, the 2 brothers attended a model boat club meeting, an event that should have ended with nothing more dramatic than stories shared around the dinner table later that evening. Instead, the brothers disappeared. Their absence immediately alarmed their family. Every hour without news intensified the fear that something terrible had happened. Yet uncertainty often creates opportunities for deception, and according to the investigation, that is precisely what followed. Sometime after the boys vanished, Members of the Winslow family received letters claiming that Lewis and Nelson had traveled voluntarily to Mexico. For parents desperate to believe their children might still be alive, such messages offered a fragile thread of hope. Even if the story seemed unusual, hope has a remarkable ability to survive when certainty is absent. Families often cling to any explanation that postpones the possibility of irreversible loss. Investigators later determined that these letters were fraudulent. Rather than revealing the boy's location, they had been created to mislead authorities and delay suspicion. The false correspondence became another example of deliberate efforts to conceal the crimes. Instead of simply hiding physical evidence, whoever prepared the letters attempted to manipulate emotions, encouraging investigators and family members to pursue explanations that diverted attention away from the Wineville Ranch. The deception succeeded only temporarily. Eventually, the truth uncovered during the investigation established that Lewis and Nelson had been taken to the ranch and murdered. Their deaths formed two of the three homicide convictions ultimately secured against Gordon Stewart. Northcote. While the stories of Alvin Gotti and the Winslow brothers became central to the criminal prosecution, no missing child associated with the investigation captured public attention more completely than Walter Collins. Even today, Walter's disappearance remains inseparable from discussions of the Wineville chicken coop murders. Not because investigators conclusively prove he died at the ranch, but because his case exposed extraordinary failures by law enforcement while illustrating the unbearable suffering experienced by families searching for missing children. On March 10, 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins left home after his mother, Christine Collins, gave him money to go to the movies. It was an ordinary Saturday. There was no indication that the routine outing would become the last confirmed moment anyone saw. Walter. Hours passed, then days. Walter never returned home. Christine Collins immediately began searching for her son, joining countless parents throughout history whose ordinary lives changed forever in a single afternoon. Every unanswered question deepened her uncertainty. Every passing day challenged her hope. Yet she refused to stop believing that Walter might still be found alive. Months later, authorities announced what appeared to be miraculous news. Police declared that Walter had been located in Illinois and arranged for a highly publicized reunion. Newspapers celebrated the apparent success of the investigation. For many observers, the case seemed ready to conclude with relief instead of tragedy. But when Christine finally saw the child presented to her, she immediately insisted that he was not her son. She stated clearly and repeatedly that the boy standing before her was someone else. Rather than accepting her concerns and reopening the investigation, police dismissed her objections. Instead of questioning whether they had made a mistake, they questioned Christine herself. According to the historical record, officers relied upon a procedure known as Code 12 to commit her to a psychiatric hospital after she continued insisting that the child was not Walter Collins. The decision shocked many people once the truth emerged. A grieving mother searching for her missing son had not been treated as a credible witness, but instead as someone whose judgment should be disregarded. Eventually, the boy himself admitted the truth. He confessed that he was not Walter Collins at all. He had impersonated the missing child because he hoped the false identity would allow him to travel to Hollywood. His confession confirmed what Christine had known from the very beginning. She had been right. The authorities had been wrong. Yet even after that revelation, Walter Collins did not return. His true fate remained unknown. During the investigation into Gordon Northcote's crimes, Walter's disappearance became closely associated with the Wineville Ranch. Sarah Louise Northcote, Gordon's mother, eventually confessed to killing Walter before later changing aspects of her statements. Nevertheless, despite the confessions and suspicions surrounding the case, investigators never recovered Walter's body, and no physical evidence conclusively established that he had died at the ranch. This distinction remains essential to understanding the historical record. Walter Collins is widely believed by many to have been one of Northcote's victims, but his death has never been legally or scientifically confirmed. The uncertainty surrounding Walter's fate has endured for nearly a century, transforming his case into one of the most haunting unresolved chapters in American criminal history. His story illustrates how the absence of evidence can become its own form of tragedy. Families naturally seek certainty, whether joyful or painful. Unanswered questions often prove even more difficult to endure than confirmed loss. Christine Collins spent years fighting not only to find her son, but also to defend the simple truth that the child returned to her was never Walter. Her determination exposed serious failures within the Los Angeles Police Department and ultimately transformed her into a symbol of perseverance in the face of institutional injustice. Together, the stories of Alvin Gotti, Lewis and Nelson Winslow, and Walter Collins reveal different dimensions of the same tragedy. Alvin reminds us that some victims nearly lost even their identities. The Winslow brothers demonstrate how hope can be manipulated through deliberate deception. Walter Collins represents both the enduring anguish of an unresolved disappearance and the devastating consequences of investigative failure. None of these boys became victims because they sought danger. They disappeared while participating in ordinary childhood activities, trusting the world around them in ways that children naturally should. Behind every newspaper headline stood parents who waited by windows, listened for footsteps that never came, and refused to surrender hope even as the days became weeks and the weeks became months. While families searched across Southern California, another frightened child remained trapped inside the Wineville Ranch. Sanford Clark had witnessed horrors that no young teenager should ever experience. Forced into silence through violence and threats, he carried knowledge that could explain the disappearances, but believed revealing the truth would cost innocent lives. The burden grew heavier with every passing day, yet that silence would not last forever. A visit from someone who knew Sanford long before the ranch would soon create the first real opportunity for the truth to emerge, setting into motion the investigation that would finally uncover the terrible secrets buried beneath the quiet fields of Wineville. Throughout much of 1928, the mystery surrounding the disappearances of young boys across Southern California continued to deepen. Parents searched neighborhoods, questioned classmates, visited police stations, and waited anxiously for any news that might explain why children had vanished without warning. Investigators pursued individual cases, but without modern communication systems or centralized missing person databases. Each disappearance often remained largely confined to its own jurisdiction. A child missing from Los Angeles was not automatically linked to another disappearance near Riverside or Pomona. The pattern that would later appear unmistakable remained hidden behind geography, limited technology, and the simple assumption that these heartbreaking events were unrelated. Unknown to nearly everyone outside the ranch, however, Gordon Stewart Northcote had already created an environment where crimes could be committed and concealed with frightening efficiency. According to the evidence later presented, once children were brought onto the property, they were isolated from the outside world almost immediately. Sanford Clark, Northcote's teenage nephew, would later explain that victims were usually confined inside either the incubator room or the chicken coop structures. These buildings, originally intended for agricultural work, became places of imprisonment. The doors remained locked, and opportunities for escape were virtually non-existent. The victims were given very little food and were kept under constant supervision. Every aspect of the ranch reflected Northcote's determination to maintain complete control over anyone brought there. Sanford's testimony painted a picture of an atmosphere governed entirely by fear. He later described children being tied up, beaten, and repeatedly sexually abused over a period of days. The violence was not impulsive or isolated. According to his account, it followed a recurring pattern in which victims were held captive, deprived of comfort, and subjected to continuing abuse before they were eventually killed. For Sanford himself, witnessing these events while enduring abuse of his own created a level of psychological trauma that investigators later recognized as central to understanding his actions during the crimes. Rather than being free to intervene or escape, Sanford lived under relentless threats. Northcott allegedly warned him repeatedly that any attempt to tell someone or flee the ranch would result not only in Sanford's death, but also in the deaths of members of his family in Canada. Those threats transformed every day into a struggle for survival. Modern readers sometimes wonder why victims trapped in abusive environments do not simply run away. Sanford's experience demonstrates how fear, isolation, and manipulation can become stronger than physical barriers. He was a young teenager living hundreds of miles from home, cut off from trusted adults, repeatedly assaulted, and convinced that resistance would place innocent people in danger. Within that environment, silence became the only strategy he believed could keep himself and his family alive. According to Sanford's later testimony, Northcott also forced him to participate in concealing evidence after murders had been committed. He described being ordered to dig graves, drag bodies, burn victims' clothing, clean blood from the incubator room, and bury human remains. He further stated that after bodies had been burned, he was required to break apart bones. Each task reinforced Northcott's absolute authority over the ranch. Refusal, Sanford believed, would end with his own murder. Compliance allowed him to survive another day, even though it burdened him with memories that would remain for the rest of his life. During the investigation and subsequent trial, authorities treated Sanford not as a willing participant, but as another victim whose actions occurred under overwhelming coercion. One detail, repeated in Sanford's testimony, would later become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. According to his account, Northcott sometimes approached victims with what sounded like a harmless invitation. He would tell them, "Come and see the baby chicks hatch." On a working poultry ranch, there was nothing inherently suspicious about such an offer. Children naturally curious about animals would have little reason to fear entering the incubator room. Yet Sanford explained that this ordinary invitation often became part of the final moments before a murder. Once the victim's attention was directed elsewhere, Northcott attacked with an axe. Sanford testified that the blows frequently came from behind, leaving the children little opportunity to react or defend themselves. Some victims reportedly died immediately, while others required multiple strikes. The murders themselves were followed by deliberate attempts to eliminate evidence. Sanford described bodies being dragged away from the killing area before being buried or burned. Clothing belonging to victims was destroyed to remove identifying evidence. Quicklime was spread over remains to accelerate decomposition and make later identification more difficult. Blood inside the incubator room had to be cleaned thoroughly. Every stage reflected planning beyond the killings themselves. Northcott did not simply commit murder, according to the evidence. He systematically attempted to erase every physical trace linking missing children to the ranch. These efforts would later explain why investigators recovered only fragmented human remains instead of complete bodies during the search of the property. While the crimes remained hidden, families continued searching for answers. Among those most deeply affected were the relatives of Lewis and Nelson Winslow. Lewis, 12 years old, and his 10-year-old brother, Nelson, disappeared in May 1928 after attending a model boat club meeting. Their disappearance devastated the family, who immediately began hoping for information that might explain where the boys had gone. Instead of receiving genuine news, they were confronted with deception. According to the investigation, letters soon arrived claiming that the brothers had voluntarily traveled to Mexico. Such messages offered desperate parents a reason to believe their sons might still be alive. Hope often survives even under the most uncertain circumstances, and families naturally search for reasons to reject the worst possibilities. Investigators later concluded that the letters were fraudulent. created to divert attention away from the true circumstances surrounding the boys' disappearance. Rather than helping locate Lewis and Nelson, the correspondents delayed suspicion by encouraging authorities and family members to pursue a false explanation. Eventually, evidence gathered during the investigation established that both brothers had been taken to the Wineville Ranch and murdered. Their deaths became two of the 3 homicide convictions ultimately secured against Gordon Stewart. Northcott. Another victim connected to the case was Alvin Godhe, whose identity remained uncertain for many years. According to the historical record provided, investigators recovered the headless body of a young male near La Puente. Initially, the victim could not be positively identified, and official records referred to him as the Headless Mexican. Later investigation concluded that the victim was most likely Alvin Godhe, and Northcott was ultimately convicted of that murder as well. The difficulty in identifying the victim reflected the broader challenges facing investigators. Without modern forensic science or DNA analysis, establishing the identity of badly damaged remains dependent upon far more limited techniques than those available today. Although Alvin's precise identification remained the subject of discussion for years afterward, the court accepted the evidence presented during the prosecution. Throughout these months, one disappearance continued receiving extraordinary public attention: the case of 9-year-old Walter Collins. Although Walter's fate has never been conclusively established, his disappearance became closely associated with the Wineville investigation. After Walter vanished on March 10, 1928, his mother, Christine Collins, searched tirelessly for him. Months later, authorities announced that Walter had supposedly been found in Illinois. When Christine met the child brought back to California, she immediately insisted that he was not her son. Instead of reopening the investigation, police rejected her claims and committed her to a psychiatric hospital under the department's Code 12 procedure. Only later did the boy admit that he had falsely claimed to be Walter Collins in hopes of reaching Hollywood. Christine's determination exposed one of the most embarrassing failures in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. During the later investigation into Northcott's crimes, Walter's disappearance became linked to the Wineville Ranch. Sarah Louise Northcott eventually confessed to killing Walter before later changing her statements. Nevertheless, investigators never recovered Walter's body, and no physical evidence conclusively established that he died at the ranch. For that reason, historians continue distinguishing between strong suspicion and legal certainty. Walter is widely believed by many to have been one of Northcott's victims, but his death has never been confirmed by physical evidence or a criminal conviction. This distinction remains essential in preserving the historical accuracy of the case. As the summer of 1928 progressed, the ranch continued to operate outwardly as though nothing unusual had occurred. Chickens still occupied the coops. Farm work continued. Passing travelers saw only another agricultural property surrounded by orange groves. Inside, however, Sanford Clark remained trapped by fear and burdened by knowledge that no child should ever carry. He had witnessed repeated abuse, helped conceal evidence under threats of death, and become the only surviving eyewitness capable of explaining what had happened within the isolated buildings. Yet despite everything he knew, he remained silent because he believed speaking would cost innocent lives. That silence finally began to break in August 1928, when Sanford's sister Jessie traveled from Canada to visit him. During her visit, she noticed something profoundly wrong. Faced with someone he trusted for the first time in many months, Sanford could no longer contain the terror and guilt that had consumed him. Overcome with emotion, he revealed that several boys had been killed at the ranch, that he had been forced to help conceal the crimes, and that Northcott had threatened to kill him if he ever told anyone. Jessie's decision after hearing those words would alter the course of the investigation forever. Instead of remaining hidden beneath the quiet fields of Wineville, the terrible truth was finally beginning its journey toward the outside world. Within days, the information she carried would reach American authorities, setting into motion the search that would expose one of the darkest criminal cases in California history. By August 1928, the silence surrounding the Wineville Ranch had lasted for far too long. Families across Southern California continued searching for missing children. Investigators pursued leads that ended in disappointment. And the isolated poultry ranch in Riverside County still appeared to outsiders as nothing more than another ordinary agricultural property. Behind that appearance, however, Sanford Clark was living under extraordinary psychological pressure. For months, he had endured abuse, witnessed repeated violence, and been forced to help conceal evidence of murders while believing that any attempt to reveal the truth would result in his own death and the deaths of members of his family. The turning point in the entire investigation came not through advanced forensic science or a chance discovery by police, but through a deeply personal moment between two siblings. Sanford's sister, Jessie Clark, traveled from Canada to visit him at the ranch during August 1928. What she expected to find was a teenage boy working on his uncle's farm. Instead, she encountered someone whose fear was impossible to hide. Although the available historical record does not describe every conversation between the brother and sister, it establishes that Sanford finally broke down emotionally and confessed what had been happening inside the isolated ranch. According to the information later provided to investigators, Sanford told Jessie that several boys had been killed there. He explained that Gordon Stewart Northcott had forced him to participate in hiding the crimes and that he had remained silent because he believed Northcott would kill him if he spoke. He also revealed that he had been threatened repeatedly and lived in constant fear. For Jessie, hearing such allegations from her younger brother must have been profoundly shocking. Sanford was not describing rumors or suspicions. He was describing events he claimed to have witnessed firsthand and acts he had been forced to carry out under threats of violence. Jessie faced an agonizing responsibility. Ignoring the story might leave other children in danger. Reporting it meant accusing a family member of some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. According to the historical record, she chose to act. After returning to Canada, Jessie reported Sanford's statements to the United States consulate. That decision became one of the most important moments in the entire case. Rather than dismissing the allegations as impossible or unbelievable, the information was forwarded to American authorities, setting in motion an official response that would ultimately expose the crimes committed at the Wineville Ranch. The investigation that followed did not begin as a murder inquiry in the modern sense. Instead, immigration authorities became involved because Sanford himself had been brought from Canada to California. On August 31st, 1928, officials arrived at the ranch. Their original purpose centered on Sanford's immigration status, but the allegations they carried with them transformed what might otherwise have been a routine administrative visit into the beginning of one of California's most significant criminal investigations. According to Sanford's later testimony, Gordon Stewart Northcott realized authorities were approaching before they reached the buildings. Seeing government vehicles from a distance, he understood that remaining at the ranch placed him in immediate danger. Rather than waiting to answer questions, Northcott fled the property. Before escaping, Sanford later explained, Northcott ordered him to delay the officials for as long as possible and warned that failure to do so would result in Sanford being shot. Even in the final moments before abandoning the ranch, Northcott relied upon fear and intimidation to maintain control over the frightened teenager. Yet circumstances had changed. With government officials now present, Sanford recognized that the opportunity he had waited for had finally arrived. Once he believed he was protected, he began telling investigators what had happened inside the ranch. His statements immediately transformed the purpose of the search. Authorities were no longer looking simply into immigration issues. They were investigating allegations of multiple child murders. Sanford directed investigators throughout the property, identifying locations that had once seemed completely ordinary, but which, according to his testimony, concealed evidence of terrible crimes. As officers examined the ranch, They began discovering physical evidence consistent with Sanford's account. The findings were deeply disturbing. Investigators recovered numerous fragments of human bones scattered across the property. Rather than finding complete skeletons, they encountered more than 50 pieces of human bone. The fragmented condition of the remains reflected the deliberate efforts described by Sanford to burn bodies and destroy evidence after the murders. Human hair was also recovered, further supporting the claim that children had been held and killed at the ranch. Inside the buildings, investigators located dried blood, including blood associated with an axe that Sanford had described during his testimony. The discovery of blood on the weapon reinforced his account that victims had been killed using an axe after being lured into vulnerable positions. Additional items connected the physical evidence directly to missing children. Authorities recovered partially burned clothing, suggesting deliberate attempts to destroy identifying evidence. They also found a Boy Scout badge, children's books, buttons, shoes, and rope. Each object represented far more than an ordinary possession. Together, they illustrated that children had indeed been present at the ranch despite there being no legitimate reason for numerous unrelated boys to leave such belongings behind. Investigators also located multiple pits that appeared consistent with Sanford's description of burial sites. Although complete bodies were not recovered, the condition of the property matched the methods Sanford had described. According to his testimony, Northcott had used quicklime to accelerate decomposition and had burned remains to make later identification difficult. The physical evidence supported that explanation. Fire and chemical decomposition had destroyed much of what modern forensic investigators might otherwise have examined. Even so, enough evidence remained to convince authorities that the allegations could not be dismissed. The ranch itself had become a massive crime scene. Every building required careful examination. Every recovered object had potential significance. Every fragment of bone represented a child whose family might still be searching for answers. Unlike many criminal investigations where a single body leads investigators toward a suspect, the Wineville search forced authorities to reconstruct events from scattered remains and the testimony of a traumatized teenage witness. Sanford's account became essential because it explained why physical evidence existed in such fragmentary form. Without his descriptions of burning bodies, burying remains, destroying clothing, and using quicklime, investigators might have struggled to interpret what they found. His testimony gave context to evidence that otherwise would have appeared incomplete and confusing. Meanwhile, Gordon Stewart Northcott remained at large. Having fled before authorities reached the ranch, he had successfully avoided immediate arrest. His escape ensured that the investigation would expand beyond California. According to the historical record, Northcott fled into nearby wooded areas before eventually crossing into Canada. He did not travel alone. His mother, Sarah Louise Northcott, accompanied him. Their departure further strengthened investigators' suspicions. Innocent people rarely abandon their homes immediately before authorities begin searching them. As news of the discoveries at the ranch spread, the case quickly attracted enormous public attention. Reports describing human bones, bloodstains, and evidence connected to missing children shocked communities already frightened by months of disappearances. The quiet farming community of Wineville suddenly became known across the nation for reasons no resident could ever have imagined. Families of missing boys watched developments with desperate hope, wondering whether the investigation would finally explain what had happened to their children. At the same time, investigators faced an extraordinarily difficult challenge. Many remains could not be positively identified because of the extensive destruction carried out after the murders. Without modern DNA analysis, forensic science relied upon far more limited techniques. Establishing the identities of victims would require combining physical evidence, missing person reports, witness testimony, and whatever personal belongings investigators could recover from the ranch. Even then, certainty would remain elusive in many cases. As officers continued processing the property, another realization became unavoidable. The investigation was no longer simply about discovering what had happened inside one isolated ranch. It had become a race to capture the man believed responsible before he could disappear permanently or harm anyone else. Authorities now knew where to focus their search. Gordon Stewart Northcott and his mother had fled to Canada, and efforts immediately began to locate them. The discoveries at Wineville had exposed the hidden crimes, but bringing the accused killer back to California would require an international pursuit. The next phase of the case would shift from uncovering evidence to securing arrests, confronting conflicting confessions, and preparing for one of the most closely watched murder trials in California's history. The discoveries at the Wineville Ranch transformed what had begun as a local investigation into a case followed across the United States. Newspapers reported the recovery of human bone fragments, blood-stained evidence, burned clothing, and personal belongings believed to have belonged to missing children. Families who had spent months searching for answers now faced the terrifying possibility that the truth might be hidden within the isolated property in Riverside County. Yet despite the growing body of evidence, the central figure in the investigation was no longer in California. Gordon Stewart Northcott had escaped before authorities reached the ranch, leaving investigators with a crime scene but no suspect in custody. According to the historical record, once Northcott realized government officials were approaching the property, he fled before questioning could begin. Rather than remaining to explain the evidence found on the ranch, he escaped and eventually crossed the international border into Canada. His mother, Sarah Louise Northcott, accompanied him. Their departure immediately complicated the investigation. California authorities could no longer rely solely on local law enforcement. The search had become an international effort requiring cooperation between officials in the United States and Canada. At the same time, investigators continued processing the ranch while attempting to determine exactly how many victims had passed through the property. Every new discovery reinforced Sanford Clark's testimony. Bone fragments recovered from multiple locations supported his description of bodies being burned and buried. Human hair, bloodstains, and children's belongings strengthened the conclusion that the ranch had indeed been the scene of repeated crimes. Yet the destruction of evidence also meant that many questions remained unanswered. Complete bodies had not survived. Identification of victims remained extraordinarily difficult. Investigators understood that even if they captured Northcott, establishing every murder beyond a reasonable doubt would present an enormous challenge. Meanwhile, information about Sanford Clark's testimony began reaching the public. His account of life inside the ranch horrified readers. According to his statements, he had lived under constant threats, endured repeated abuse, and been forced to help conceal evidence after murders were committed. He described digging graves, moving bodies, burning clothing, cleaning blood from the incubator room, and helping destroy human remains under the threat of death. Authorities recognized that Sanford was not simply another witness. He was the only surviving eyewitness capable of explaining how the crimes had been committed and why. So little physical evidence remained. Without his testimony, investigators would have faced tremendous difficulty interpreting what they had found at the ranch. As American authorities coordinated with Canadian officials, the search for Gordon Stewart Northcott and Sarah Louise Northcott intensified. Their location eventually became known, and both were arrested in Canada during September 1928. The arrests represented a major breakthrough, but they did not immediately resolve the case. Before the accused could face trial in California, legal procedures required that they be returned through extradition. The process ensured that both Gordon and Sarah would eventually be transported back to the United States to answer the allegations against them. During this period, investigators also confronted another challenge that would continue throughout the entire legal process: the statements made by Gordon Stewart Northcott himself. According to the historical record, Northcott repeatedly changed his story. At different times, he admitted responsibility for certain crimes, denied involvement altogether, and later altered his account once again. His shifting statements created enormous difficulties for investigators attempting to separate reliable admissions from false or contradictory claims. Rather than presenting a single consistent confession, Northcott moved unpredictably between acknowledgement and denial. At certain points, he reportedly boasted about killing more than 5 victims. Those statements fueled widespread speculation. Newspapers and members of the public began wondering whether the crimes uncovered at the ranch represented only a fraction of the total number of murders. Some reports suggested that as many as 10 or even 20 children might have been killed. Such estimates reflected the uncertainty surrounding the investigation rather than proven fact. Authorities remained cautious, although Northcott had made various statements implying additional murders. Investigators lacked sufficient physical evidence to confirm many of those claims. This distinction would remain essential during the prosecution. Courts require evidence rather than speculation, regardless of how horrifying allegations may appear. Sarah Louise Northcott also became a source of extraordinary confusion during the investigation. According to the historical record, Gordon's mother repeatedly changed her own statements. At times, she confessed to involvement in murders. Later, she withdrew those confessions. Then she offered new versions of events that differed from her earlier accounts. Her shifting testimony complicated an already difficult investigation because investigators could not assume that every confession represented an accurate account of what had actually occurred. One of Sarah's most significant admissions involved Walter Collins, the missing 9-year-old whose disappearance had already become a national story. Sarah eventually confessed to killing Walter Collins. That confession attracted enormous public attention because Walter's case had become inseparable from the failures of the Los Angeles Police Department. However, despite Sarah's admission, investigators still faced a fundamental problem. Walter's body had never been recovered. No physical evidence conclusively established that he had died at the Wineville Ranch. As a result, although Sarah's confession became part of the legal proceedings against her, the historical record continues to distinguish between her statements and evidence capable of conclusively proving Walter's fate. The uncertainty surrounding Walter Collins remained one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire investigation. While authorities prepared the case for trial, prosecutors carefully examined which charges could realistically be supported by evidence. The physical condition of the crime scene placed significant limits on what could be proven. Bodies had been burned, buried, and subjected to quicklime. Many remains could not be identified with certainty. Sanford Clark's testimony explained what had happened, but prosecutors still needed sufficient corroborating evidence to satisfy legal standards for conviction. Ultimately, the prosecution focused on the strongest cases supported by both witness testimony and physical evidence. Those cases involved the murders of Louis Winslow, Nelson Winslow, and Alvin Godhe, identified in court records as the Headless Mexican. These murders formed the foundation of the criminal case against Gordon Stewart Northcott. Although investigators suspected additional victims and Northcott himself made statements suggesting further killings, prosecutors concentrated on the charges they believed could withstand scrutiny during trial. This decision reflected the realities of criminal justice. A successful prosecution depends not upon the total number of suspected crimes, but upon presenting evidence that convinces a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. During the months leading to trial, public interest continued growing. The case contained nearly every element capable of capturing national attention: missing children, an isolated ranch, horrifying allegations of abuse, conflicting confessions, international extradition, and a witness who had survived months of captivity. Newspapers followed every development closely, often emphasizing the shocking nature of the discoveries made at the ranch. At the same time, many families whose children had disappeared hoped investigators might eventually identify additional victims through continuing examination of the evidence. Yet despite intense public attention, investigators remained aware that important questions would likely never receive complete answers. The deliberate destruction of evidence had permanently limited what science could establish. Many remains were too fragmented for certain identification. Some confessions contradicted earlier statements. Rumors circulated far beyond what investigators could verify. Throughout the investigation, authorities repeatedly distinguished between documented evidence and unconfirmed allegations. That careful approach would ultimately shape both the prosecution and the historical understanding of the case. As Gordon Stewart Northcott and Sarah Louise Northcott returned to California, the focus shifted from investigation to accountability. The evidence gathered from the ranch, Sanford Clark's testimony, the recovered physical exhibits, and the defendant's own contradictory statements would soon be examined in open court. There, under public scrutiny, prosecutors would attempt to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the Quiet Chicken Ranch in Wineville had concealed a series of brutal murders. The courtroom would become the setting where months of investigation, countless hours of searching, and the courage of a frightened teenage witness would finally be tested before a jury charged with determining Gordon Stewart Northcott's fate. The return of Gordon Stewart Northcott to California marked the beginning of the final and most public phase of the Wineville chicken coop murders investigation. For months, authorities had worked to reconstruct events that had taken place behind the fences of an isolated chicken ranch. They had collected fragments of evidence, interviewed witnesses, examined the property, and relied heavily on the testimony of Sanford Clark, the young survivor who had carried the truth of the crimes long before anyone else knew. Now, the question facing the justice system was whether that evidence was enough to prove that Northcott was responsible for the murders of the children whose names had become connected to the case. The trial would not only determine Northcott's fate, it would also force the public to confront the horrifying reality that children had disappeared. While an investigation system struggled to recognize the pattern, as the legal proceedings moved forward, the prosecution faced a difficult task. The investigation had uncovered disturbing evidence, but the nature of the crimes created serious challenges. Unlike many murder cases where investigators recover complete bodies and can establish identity through direct physical evidence, the Wineville investigation was built around fragments. Human remains had been damaged through burning and decomposition. Some victims could not be identified with certainty. Important questions remained unanswered. How many children had actually been killed? Which disappearances could be directly connected to the ranch? Which accusations could be proven in court rather than simply suspected? These questions shaped every decision made by prosecutors. The legal system required evidence that met a specific standard. Public belief, newspaper reports, and even a suspect's own statements were not enough unless they could be supported through reliable evidence. For that reason, prosecutors focused on the murders they believed could be established most clearly: Lewis Winslow, Nelson Winslow, and Alvin Godhe. These three cases represented the strongest combination of testimony and available evidence. The prosecution's most important witness remained Sanford Clark. His position in the trial was unique and painful. He was not simply someone who had heard about the crimes afterward. He was someone who had lived inside the environment where the crimes occurred. He had experienced Northcott's control personally and had witnessed events that no child should ever have been forced to see. When Sanford testified, he described the conditions inside the ranch and explained how Northcott had operated. According to his testimony, the victims were brought to the property through deception. They were isolated, abused, and prevented from escaping. Sanford explained that Northcott controlled him through violence and threats, forcing him to assist in concealing the crimes. His testimony provided the connection between the physical evidence recovered at the ranch and the events investigators believed had occurred there. Without Sanford's account, items such as burned clothing, bone fragments, blood evidence, and burial locations would have been much more difficult to interpret. His testimony gave the investigation a human perspective that physical evidence alone could not provide. Behind every piece of evidence was a child who had once lived, a family that had searched, and a life that had been violently ended. The defense faced the challenge of responding to evidence that had generated enormous public outrage. Northcott's own behavior complicated the situation further. Throughout the investigation, he had repeatedly changed his statements. At various moments, he admitted involvement, denied accusations, and altered his explanations. His inconsistent statements made it difficult to determine when he was telling the truth and when he was attempting to manipulate investigators or public opinion. At times, he reportedly claimed responsibility for additional murders, creating speculation that the number of victims might have been far higher than the 3 cases proven in court. Yet these statements also created uncertainty. A confession without supporting evidence could not automatically establish guilt for every alleged crime. Investigators understood that Northcott's words had to be examined carefully. His willingness to make dramatic claims did not replace the need for proof. The trial therefore focused on what could be demonstrated rather than every allegation surrounding the case. Sarah Louise Northcott's involvement also remained a major issue throughout the legal proceedings. As Gordon's mother, she had been connected to the events at the ranch and had accompanied him when they fled to Canada. Her own statements during the investigation had repeatedly changed. At different points, she confessed to crimes and later withdrew those admissions. Her most significant confession involved Walter Collins, the 9-year-old boy whose disappearance had already become a national scandal. Sarah claimed responsibility for Walter's death, but the case remained complicated because Walter's body had never been found. The absence of physical evidence meant that his death could not be conclusively established in the same way as the murders used against Gordon Northcott. Walter's disappearance therefore remained one of the most emotionally powerful but legally uncertain elements of the entire case. While the public often connected Walter directly to the Wineville Ranch, investigators and courts had to separate suspicion from proof. That distinction became one of the most important lessons of the investigation. A person could be strongly suspected of a crime, yet the legal system required evidence capable of supporting a conviction. The trial attracted widespread attention throughout California and beyond. The public had followed every stage of the investigation, from the discovery of human remains at the ranch to the arrest of the Northcotts in Canada. Newspapers reported on the testimony, the evidence, and the disturbing details emerging from the courtroom. The case had become more than a murder trial. It had become a symbol of fear, grief, and the consequences of investigative failures. Many people were especially angered by what had happened to Christine Collins, Walter's mother. Her insistence that the boy returned by police was not her son had initially been ignored. Instead of reopening the investigation, authorities had questioned her judgment and placed her in a psychiatric institution through the Code 12 procedure. Later, when the impersonation was exposed, her claims were proven correct. The incident damaged public confidence in law enforcement and became one of the most criticized aspects of the entire case. As the trial continued, prosecutors presented the evidence connecting Northcott to the murders of Lewis and Nelson Winslow and Alvin Godhe. They described the isolated ranch, the recovered remains, the physical evidence, and Sanford Clark's testimony. Together, these elements created a picture of a systematic pattern rather than isolated acts of violence. The prosecution argued that Northcott had used the appearance of an ordinary farm operation to conceal crimes against children who had been brought there under false promises. The defense attempted to challenge the reliability of the accusations and the circumstances surrounding the evidence. The case involved many complicated issues, including conflicting statements, damaged physical evidence, and public emotion surrounding the crimes. However, after reviewing the testimony and evidence presented, the jury reached its decision. On February 8, 1929, Gordon Stewart Northcott was found guilty of first-degree murder for the killings of Lewis Winslow, Nelson Winslow, and Alvin Godhe. The verdict represented the conclusion of months of investigation and legal proceedings. For the families of the victims, however, a conviction could never restore what had been lost. A courtroom decision could acknowledge responsibility, but it could not return children who had disappeared or erase the suffering experienced by those who had waited for them. The conviction also did not answer every question surrounding the case. The possibility of additional victims remained. Northcote's own statements had suggested more crimes, but many could not be verified. Walter Collins remained missing, and his fate was never conclusively established. The uncertainty surrounding the full extent of Northcote's actions continued even after the jury delivered its verdict. Following his conviction, Northcote was sentenced to death. The final stage of his case would take place at San Quentin Prison, where he would await execution. For a crime that had shocked the nation, the legal process had produced an official answer regarding 3 murders. But many mysteries remained unresolved. The Wineville chicken coop murders had demonstrated both the power and the limitations of the justice system. Investigators had uncovered the truth because one survivor found the courage to speak. Evidence had been recovered because authorities acted on his information. Yet the destruction of physical evidence and failures that occurred earlier in the investigation meant that some answers would remain permanently out of reach. As Northcote awaited his final punishment, the people of California continued to struggle with the legacy of the case. The ranch that had once appeared ordinary had become a symbol of hidden evil. The children whose names became associated with the investigation represented not only victims of a criminal act, but also reminders of the responsibility to listen, investigate carefully, and protect the vulnerable. The final chapter of Gordon Stewart Northcote's life would come soon, but the impact of the Wineville chicken coop murders would continue long after the sentence was carried out. The conviction of Gordon Stewart Northcote in February 1929 brought a legal conclusion to one of the most disturbing criminal cases California had ever witnessed. After months of investigation, international cooperation, courtroom testimony, and public attention, a jury had found him guilty of murdering Lewis Winslow, Nelson Winslow, and Alvin Godhe. Yet the verdict did not bring complete closure. The Wineville chicken coop murders remained surrounded by unanswered questions, missing children, conflicting statements, and uncertainty about the true number of victims. For the families who had lost their children, justice had arrived, but the pain caused by their disappearances could never be undone. For investigators, the case represented both a major success in uncovering hidden crimes and a reminder of the devastating consequences that could follow when warnings were overlooked and investigations failed. After his conviction, Gordon Stewart Northcote was sentenced to death. He was transferred to San Quentin Prison, where he would spend the remaining months of his life awaiting execution. During this period, his behavior continued to reflect the same contradictions that had appeared throughout the investigation. He had previously changed his statements many times, moving between admissions and denials. At different moments, he acknowledged involvement in killings, then rejected accusations, and later offered different versions of events. These inconsistencies made it difficult for investigators and the public to determine which statements contained truth and which were attempts to manipulate the situation. Even after the trial, questions remained about whether Northcote had committed additional murders beyond those proven in court. His own statements had contributed to speculation that the number of victims might have been much higher. Some reports at the time suggested that he could have been responsible for 10, 15, or even 20 deaths. However, these estimates were never confirmed through sufficient evidence. The legal record established 3 murder convictions, and historians continue to distinguish carefully between proven crimes and suspected ones. This distinction is important because the case became surrounded by rumors, public fear, and intense media attention. The horror of the crimes encouraged speculation, but speculation alone could not provide certainty. The fate of Walter Collins remained one of the most painful, unresolved aspects of the entire case. Walter's disappearance had already become a national story before the Wineville investigation fully developed. His mother's determination, her refusal to accept that the child returned by police was her son, and the authorities' decision to place her in a psychiatric institution had created a major public controversy. When the impersonating boy later admitted the truth, Christine Collins was proven correct. However, the revelation did not answer the most important question: what had actually happened to Walter? Sarah Louise Northcott had confessed to killing him, but she later changed her statements. No body was ever recovered. No physical evidence conclusively established that Walter had been murdered at the ranch. As a result, Walter's case remained caught between belief and proof. Many people considered him another victim of Gordon Northcott, but the evidence required for a formal confirmation never existed. His disappearance became a lasting symbol of uncertainty, representing all families who search for missing loved ones without ever receiving complete answers. Sarah Louise Northcott's own fate also became part of the complicated aftermath of the case. As Gordon's mother, she had been involved in the events surrounding the ranch and had fled with him to Canada. During the investigation, she repeatedly changed her account of what had happened. Her statements created confusion, particularly regarding Walter Collins. Eventually, she accepted responsibility for Walter's death and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, because Walter's body was never found and the evidence remained incomplete, questions about her exact role continued. The case demonstrated how difficult it could be to separate confession, responsibility, and proof when evidence had been destroyed or circumstances remained uncertain. While the legal proceedings focused primarily on Gordon and Sarah Northcott, another important figure in the story was Sanford Clark. Unlike the defendants, Sanford did not leave the case behind after the trial ended. The experiences he endured at the ranch shaped his entire life. He had entered California as a teenager expecting to work on a farm and instead became a victim of abuse and coercion. His testimony had helped uncover the truth, but speaking publicly about what happened required him to revisit traumatic memories. The role Sanford played in the investigation remains one of the most significant aspects of the case. Without his courage in telling Jesse what had happened, the ranch might not have been searched when it was. Without his explanation of the property and the crimes, investigators might not have understood the meaning of the evidence they discovered. Sanford's story also demonstrates the complicated position of survivors who are forced into criminal situations by threats and violence. He was present during the crimes, but his presence was not voluntary. He was a child controlled by an adult who used fear as a weapon. The investigation recognized this reality, treating him as a victim and a critical witness rather than as a willing participant. On October 2, 1930, Gordon Stewart Northcott was executed by hanging at San Quentin Prison. He was only 23 years old. His death ended the legal process against him, but it did not end the public discussion surrounding the Wineville chicken coop murders. The case continued to influence conversations about missing children, police responsibility, and the importance of believing victims and witnesses. One of the most significant consequences of the case involved the Los Angeles Police Department and the handling of the Walter Collins disappearance. The decision to dismiss Christine Collins's concerns and use the Code 12 procedure against her became one of the most criticized examples of institutional failure connected to the investigation. Her experience showed the dangers of authorities refusing to reconsider their assumptions, even when a family member insists that something is wrong. The controversy surrounding her case contributed to public pressure for changes in police practices and accountability. The story also changed the identity of the community where the crimes occurred. Wineville became permanently associated with the horrifying discoveries made at the chicken ranch. Residents wanted distance from the name that had become nationally recognized as a symbol of tragedy and fear. Eventually, the town changed its name to Mira Loma, an effort to separate the community from the crimes committed there. The physical location remained, but the name associated with the scandal disappeared. Decades later, the Wineville chicken coop murders continued to attract attention from historians, crime researchers, and filmmakers. The case became the inspiration for the film Changeling, which focused particularly on the disappearance of Walter Collins and his mother's struggle against a system that refused to acknowledge the truth. Although dramatized works often introduce emotional interpretations, the historical importance of the case remains rooted in documented events. Children disappeared. A survivor revealed hidden crimes. Investigators uncovered evidence at an isolated ranch. And failures within law enforcement caused additional suffering for grieving families. Nearly a century after the investigation, the exact number of Gordon Northcote's victims remains unknown. 3 murders were proven in court. Walter Collins is widely considered a possible additional victim, but his death was never conclusively established. Other suspected victims remain uncertain because evidence was either destroyed or never discovered. The possibility that Northcote killed more children continues to exist, but the historical record cannot provide a definitive number. That uncertainty is one of the most haunting parts of the case. The Wineville chicken coop murders are remembered not only because of the crimes committed, but because of the unanswered questions left behind. The victims were children whose lives ended before they had the chance to grow up. Their families endured years of uncertainty, hoping for answers that often never came. Sanford Clark carried memories of unimaginable experiences and found the courage to speak. Christine Collins fought to prove a truth that authorities refused to accept. Investigators uncovered evidence hidden beneath an ordinary-looking farm. And the community was forced to confront the reality that terrible crimes could exist behind a familiar landscape. The legacy of the case remains a warning about the importance of listening to victims, protecting vulnerable people, and recognizing that justice depends not only on finding those responsible, but also on remembering those who suffered. The names of Louis Winslow, Nelson Winslow, Alvin Gotthe, Walter Collins, and the other children connected to the investigation continue to represent the human cost behind one of America's most disturbing criminal cases. Their stories endure not because of the horror surrounding their deaths, but because their lives deserve to be remembered beyond the crimes committed against them. The Wineville chicken coop murders remain one of the most disturbing criminal cases in American history, not only because of the violence committed at a quiet chicken ranch in California, but because of everything the case revealed about fear, investigation, justice, and the importance of listening to those who seek help. Nearly a century later, the details surrounding Gordon Stewart Northcote, the missing children, and the failures that surrounded the investigation continue to raise difficult questions. The case was never simply about a single criminal act. It was about a series of disappearances, a survivor trapped in silence, families searching desperately for answers, and institutions that failed to recognize the truth until it was almost too late. At the center of the story were children whose lives were taken away before they had the opportunity to grow. Louis Winslow was 12 years old. His younger brother Nelson was only 10. Alvin Gotthe, whose identity remained uncertain for years, was another young victim whose death became connected to the ranch. Walter Collins, the 9-year-old boy whose disappearance captured national attention, became one of the most remembered names associated with the case, even though his fate was never legally confirmed. Behind every investigation document, every piece of evidence, and every courtroom argument were real children whose families waited, searched, and hoped. The Wineville case demonstrated the devastating emotional impact of missing child cases. For parents, uncertainty can become its own form of suffering. The absence of information leaves families trapped between hope and grief. They continue searching because accepting the possibility of loss feels impossible. In the cases connected to the Wineville Ranch, many families spent months not knowing whether their children were alive or where they had gone. The investigation eventually revealed a terrible truth for some, but for others, including the family of Walter Collins, uncertainty remained. One of the most important lessons of the case came from the experience of Sanford Clark. His story showed the complicated reality of victims who were trapped by abuse and threats. Sanford was not an ordinary witness who happened to discover evidence. He was a teenager who had been taken away from his home, placed under the control of an abusive adult, and forced to live in an environment where fear dominated every part of his life. Northcote's power over Sanford came not only from physical violence, but from psychological control. By threatening to harm Sanford and his family, Northcote created a situation where silence became a survival mechanism. When Sanford finally revealed the truth to his sister Jessie, he did something extraordinarily difficult. He risked the consequences he had feared for months. His decision became the foundation of the entire investigation. Without Sanford's account, authorities might have discovered suspicious evidence at the ranch, but struggled to understand what had happened there. His testimony connected scattered fragments into a larger picture. He explained why there were human remains, why clothing had been burned, why blood evidence existed, and why the property contained signs of violence. His words allowed investigators to reconstruct crimes that had been deliberately hidden. The investigation itself demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the justice system. Once authorities acted on Sanford's information, they uncovered evidence that confirmed many parts of his account. The discovery of human bones, hair, blood evidence, burned clothing, children's belongings, and burial locations revealed that the ranch had been the scene of serious crimes. Yet the destruction of evidence also limited what investigators could prove. Many remains could not be identified. Some possible victims could never be confirmed. The full number of children who may have been killed remains unknown. This uncertainty continues to shape how historians view the case. Gordon Stewart Northcote was convicted of 3 murders, but many questions remain about whether additional victims existed. His own statements contributed to speculation because he sometimes claimed responsibility for more killings than investigators could verify. However, responsible historical analysis requires separating proven facts from possibilities. The evidence confirms certain crimes. It strongly suggests others. But many allegations remain unresolved because the necessary proof no longer exists. The same principle applies to Walter Collins. His disappearance became one of the most tragic parts of the case because it represented both the suffering of a missing child and the failure of authorities to respond appropriately to his mother's concerns. Christine Collins insisted that the boy returned to her was not her son. Instead of accepting her statement and continuing the search, authorities questioned her and used the Code 12 procedure to place her in a psychiatric institution. Later events proved that her concerns had been valid. The impersonating child admitted that he had falsely claimed to be Walter Collins. The incident damaged public confidence in law enforcement and became a powerful example of what can happen when authorities prioritize defending their actions rather than examining whether those actions were correct. The aftermath of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. The town of Wineville became permanently associated with the crimes committed at the chicken ranch. The name itself carried the weight of tragedy and public fear. Eventually, the community changed its name to Mira Loma, separating the location from the identity created by the investigation. The change reflected a desire to move beyond the association with the crimes while acknowledging the history that had taken place there. The case also contributed to broader discussions about police accountability and investigative practices. The handling of Walter Collins' disappearance, particularly the treatment of Christine Collins, became a lasting example of institutional failure. It demonstrated the importance of taking missing person cases seriously, listening to families, and remaining willing to reconsider conclusions when evidence challenges assumptions. Although investigative methods have changed significantly since the 1920s, the fundamental lessons remain relevant. Every missing child represents a family searching for answers, and every report deserves careful attention. The Wineville chicken coop murders also became part of American popular culture because of the emotional power of the story. The case inspired the film Changeling, which focused on the disappearance of Walter Collins and his mother's struggle against a system that refused to accept her truth. While dramatic adaptations may interpret historical events differently, the continued interest in the case reflects the enduring questions it raises about justice and responsibility. Yet the most important way to remember the Wineville case is not through fascination with the criminal. Gordon Stewart Northcott should not be remembered because of the attention his crimes attracted. The focus should remain on the victims, the families who suffered, and the people who fought to uncover the truth. True crime stories carry a responsibility. They must not transform victims into background details or allow offenders to become larger-than-life figures. The significance of this case comes from understanding the human consequences of violence and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The final count of victims connected to Gordon Northcott may never be known with certainty. 3 murders resulted in criminal convictions. Walter Collins remains widely believed by many to have been another victim, but his death was never conclusively proven. Other possible victims remain part of the unresolved history surrounding the ranch. The absence of complete answers is painful, but it also reminds us of the limitations faced by investigators nearly 100 years ago. Evidence can disappear, memories can change, witnesses can be lost, but the responsibility to seek truth remains. The Wineville chicken coop murders stand as a reminder that evil can exist behind ordinary appearances. A chicken ranch surrounded by orange groves appeared harmless from the outside. Yet inside those buildings, children suffered unimaginable cruelty. The case reminds society that protecting the vulnerable requires attention, compassion, and the willingness to believe those who speak about danger. It also reminds us that justice is not only measured by convictions. It is measured by whether victims are remembered, whether failures are acknowledged, and whether future generations learn from past mistakes. The story of Wineville is ultimately not the story of Gordon Northcott. It is the story of children who disappeared, families who refused to stop searching, a survivor who found the courage to speak, and a community forced to confront a painful truth. Their names and their lives remain the most important part of the history. The crimes ended nearly a century ago, but the lessons from those events continue to matter. The search for truth, the protection of children, and the responsibility to listen remain as important today as they were when Sanford Clark finally decided to tell the world what had happened inside the hidden corners of the Wineville Ranch.